The legislature's passed and the governor has signed a major new transportation package that'll help fix California's crumbling highways, roads, and bridges. But it's going to come at a cost, $5.2 billion a year in new gas taxes and vehicle fees. Will it make a difference? And while we're at it, what's going on with high-speed rail? We'll ask Brian Kelly, the California Secretary of Transportation, Lisa Marie Alley with the California High-Speed Rail Authority, Dan Walters with Cal Matters, and John Myers with the LA Times. Transportation fixes? Pay me now or pay me later.
Additional funding for the Maddie Report made possible by a grant from The Wonderful Company, harvesting health and happiness around the world. Chevron's Coalinga oil field and Fresno County have been doing side by side for over 100 years. Learn more at doers.com. From the California Channel at the State Capitol and the Maddie Institute, it's the Maddie Report with Executive Director of the Maddie Institute, Mark Kepler.
Welcome. So what is the current condition of the state's highways and bridges, and what will it cost to repair and maintain them? Our guest is someone who knows, California Secretary of Transportation, Brian Kelly. Welcome to the Maddie Report.
Thanks, I'm happy to be here.
So I'm sure a lot of people in our audience have their own experiences with California roads and bridges, but you actually, the State Department of Transportation, actually collects data on the condition of state roads and highways. What does your data show?
Well, particularly during the conversation on SB 1 in the legislature, the funding bill, California ranks roughly 45th nationally in the condition of our highway pavement. We have 500 bridges that are defined by the federal government as structurally deficient. And about 41% of our pavement today is either in need of repair or preventative maintenance.
So in the pavement, they actually re-rate pavement, right? So it goes from what, poor to good.
Poor to good to fair, right.
Yeah,
that's right.
And a lot of it is in poor condition?
Well, as I said, 41% either needs major repair, replacement, or preventative maintenance.
You think of the magnitude of the problem. We have, I think, you're going to correct me if I'm wrong, but 350,000 miles of road, state and local. We've got 25,000 bridges, and we've got 35 million plus motorists.
That's right.
A lot of people.
California has the biggest and most complex transportation system in the country, and when I think about it, when you just look at how many miles we drive on the road every year, it's on the order of 332 billion miles a year. And just to give some perspective on that, that's the same amount as like Florida and Texas combined.
Wow.
So it's mammoth here.
Car culture.
Yes.
So let me ask you about this. There's been a lot of talk for some time about the maintenance and rehabilitation backlog that exists on state roads and bridges. How big is that backlog?
Well, again, prior to the enactment of SB 1, we identified that as about a $6 billion annual deferred maintenance backlog on our bridge and highway rehabilitation and replacement program. So significant.
So I was reading some of your stuff, and I don't want to get too wonky here for our audience, but there's a highway maintenance program, and there's a state highway operation protection program.
That's right, the SHOP, yes.
SHOP,
yes.
And I was looking at that, there's something like, they were saying, this might have been the LAO, was saying that there's, one is $3 billion in backlog, the other is $9 billion.
Yeah, we're changing the way we do this because we're getting better at the data, and we're moving to an asset management plan which combines both maintenance and the SHOP. But where we had been is that the SHOP needs were about $8.1 billion a year, and we only had revenue at $2.3 billion. So we had a $5.8 billion
Billion with a B.
With a B, yeah. Deferred maintenance backlog or underinvestment in that area, and that's why when we pushed SB 1 during the legislative cycle earlier this year, we focused on Fix It First.
Yeah, it's interesting. There was a field poll done a while ago about what Californians feel about roads. Do they want to see new construction? Do they want to see maintenance? And actually, they want to see maintenance. 71%.
They do. I mean, you may be familiar with this, but there's other studies that show what the impact on the common motorist is on their vehicle and costs to their vehicle by unmaintained roads. And so we were not surprised that a lot of folks want those potholes fixed, and we want to get them fixed.
Yeah, pay me now or pay me later.
Exactly.
There are some that are going to argue that, listen, there's enough federal, state, and local dollars to really take care of this. Just make Caltrans more efficient. Why don't you buy that argument? I mean, it's not as simple as that, I assume, in your mind?
Well, look, we are always striving for greater efficiency, and I think people ought to know that Caltrans is much more efficient as an organization today than it has been in decades. Caltrans' capital support, which is the team that puts together the projects to be ready to list to go to construction. They do the design work and the environmental work on projects that their level of staff for those purposes is at a 19-year low. today, and Caltrans is delivering roughly the same amount of projects with about 4,000 fewer staff than they were 10 years ago.
And the revenue coming in because cars have got better efficiency. They're electric cars. There are things that are actually reducing the amount of revenue coming in.
That's right. That plus inflation, because gas tax for a long time was
decades.
Yes, and it was flat and didn't grow with either inflation or demand or population size or anything. So you erode the value of the gas tax. You increase the efficiency of cars. You erode it even further.
And meanwhile, the construction materials are not going down.
That's right.
Going up,
That's
so.
right. And I think it's worth noting that we had not touched the gas tax in California in 28 years.
Yeah, it's been a while.
So, yeah.
It's been 28 years. That was pretty amazing. The federal gas tax, same thing. I mean, it's
That's right.
been
a little bit less. I think 93 was their last time.
decades.
Yeah.
We're talking
Yeah.
decades. Let me ask this last question in this segment about this $5.2 billion a year for transportation.
Yes.
That's going to gas tax is kicking in on November 1. Just to put it in perspective, how much money is currently budgeted for transportation each year in California?
Well, Caltrans's budget itself is about just over $10.7 billion a year, but that includes dollars that we give directly to the local governments. Okay. To put it in a broader perspective, California spends between local, state, and federal money $27 billion annually on transportation, but that is all things transportation: state, federal, local, all needs, all elements. And local governments provide about half of that. The state provides about a quarter, and the federal government provides about a quarter.
Okay, well, up next, we're going to talk about how that new money is going to be spent. That conversation in a moment. This is the Maddy Report. Welcome back. I'm Mark Kepler with the Maddy Institute. It's important to note that while no one probably wants to pay or see a gas tax increase, someone suggests it's really, we talked about earlier, kind of pay me now or pay me later, maybe with a new front-end alignment. So there's going to be additional money that's going to be paid by California taxpayers, $5.2 billion a year. Is it going to be a good return for California motorists? We're talking with California Secretary of Transportation Brian Kelly. So can you break down the revenue? Where's the money coming from, and how is it going to be spent?
Yeah, the revenue is coming from several different sources. I mean, we are returning to a philosophy and a principle that was followed in California for nearly 90 years, since 1923, which was, let's fund transportation with user fees from transportation, and let's dedicate those to that purpose. So SB 1 goes back to what has worked, as I said, for nearly 100 years in California. The gas tax, diesel tax, and a vehicle fee are the heart of what SB 1 included in it. And so, that is a philosophy that has been shared by Republicans and Democrats alike. Ronald Reagan increased the gas tax at the federal level, and George Deukmejian was the last governor in California to do it before this one.
It's been a while.
Yeah, but my point is, this is it should be a non-controversial source to go back to user fees dedicated to transportation that come from the transportation sector. Again, it's tried and true. It's what we've done. All of those, sort of everybody paying some share, provides the necessary revenue.
Even those driving electric cars now are going to have a fee.
They will.
In 2020,
a $100 fee beginning in 2020. So again, the thought was everybody benefits, everybody has a share to pay.
Right. So let's talk about the use
Yes.
of the money. It seems to be a heavy emphasis on maintenance.
There is. Fix It First is clearly the focus of this. As I mentioned, we have big needs with bridges and pavement and culverts in California that are not in great shape. Our bridges are antiquated. So we're going to use these dollars to upgrade bridges, modernize them to today's standards. We're going to improve the pavement on some 17,000 miles of highway lanes in California. And we're going to fix 55,000 culverts, which are really important elements to make sure that water can flow underneath our transportation systems without flooding, and that's vitally important in the state as well.
A lot of this money is going to be used on roads. Some money is going to be used for mass transit, but
Yes.
about, 70% of the funds are going to be used for roads?
About 65%. Most of it is, as I said, Fix It First. But yeah, the thrust of this is improving the structures that people drive on.
As much as I enjoy bike lanes and bike trails, that's not what the money is going to be. Some money is actually going to be spent there, but not the lion's share is going to be toward roads.
You really can't pass a transportation funding package through the legislature without doing something for everybody.
Yeah.
So there is money in here for trade corridor improvements, and there's money in here for bike and pedestrian facilities. But as you noted, 66%, about 2/3 of the money is going to fixing our roads and bridges.
So how do you going to make sure that this money is going to be spent efficiently and effectively? Like, talk about Caltrans, for example, their performance.
Yeah. There's a couple of things that were included in SB 1 that I think are relevant here. One, in terms of staffing levels at the department, for the first time, The California Transportation Commission, which is a public body that oversees Caltrans, will have a role in looking at and improving staffing levels for the Fix It First projects at Caltrans. That's one. The bill also included an Inspector General office at Caltrans to assure that programs are being performed efficiently, will be subject to audit and review by an Inspector General. It's the first time we've included that at the Department of Transportation here in California.
They're also demanding $100 million in savings.
Yeah, I mean, there's always efficiencies that we're chasing, and I think as a matter of how many projects that we are producing with the level of staff we have, I think we're going to be able to identify real savings and show that we're operating more efficiently.
Well, the legislative analyst, was looking at this, seems to generally like it, but they're saying, we really should probably have some metrics along the way, some interim guidance. What are your thoughts on that?
Look, I agree, and we committed, in fact, in SB1 itself, we committed to very specific performance outcomes. We said how many bridges we're going to fix over a 10-year horizon, how many miles of highway lanes we're going to improve the pavement on. Local governments are submitting their project list to the CTC starting next month. So we've already committed to this, and we put in the bill, let's work with the California Transportation Commission to upgrade those performance measures as we go forward. So I welcome the input from the LAO or anybody else, and we look forward to moving those to make sure we're hitting the right targets.
I want to ask you about gridlock. I mean, that's a big issue, maybe not so much in the Central Valley, but certainly in Los Angeles and San Francisco. What's being done here to address gridlock?
Well, a lot. I mean, one, while there's an emphasis on Fix It First, it's important to note that we're also focusing money on a program called the Congested Corridors program. And what we're trying to award here is we see localities around the state that for the first time are taking more comprehensive approaches to congestion. Rather than just building a lane, they're looking at the entire corridor and saying maybe it needs a lane, maybe it needs a transit help, maybe it needs a bus rapid transit. For the first time, we're putting up state money for a match program for locals that are taking a comprehensive approach to congestion, and the state's going to help fund that broader approach.
Yeah, I want to ask you this last thing, the future of transportation. It seems like it's changing at such a rapid pace. Hydrogen highways and autonomous vehicles. What are you doing to plan for the future?
Well, we're doing a lot. My Department of Motor Vehicles is completing a rulemaking now to allow for further testing and deployment of autonomous vehicles without drivers behind the wheel. And that rulemaking will be done by the end of 2017. So we're moving forward on that. SB1 itself requires Caltrans to, when they're replacing a segment of road, to consider how to put into the new roadway better sensors, better striping to deal with technology that's coming.
It's just,
and so we're beginning that process now, but it's incorporated in much of the work that we're doing on a day-to-day basis. And of course, we're also trying to build the nation's first high-speed rail system. Yeah,
and actually, we're going to talk about that in the next segment. But I want to thank California Secretary of Transportation Brian Kelly for joining us, and we're going to talk about the current status of the state's first-in-the-nation high-speed rail project in a moment. This is the Maddie Report. Welcome back. I'm Mark Kepler with the Maddie Institute. So what's the current status of the state's high-speed rail project? Our guest is Lisa Marie Alley with the High-Speed Rail Authority. Welcome.
Thanks, Mark.
So one issue that's been dogging the program is financing. Skeptics are going to say, listen, you've only secured 60% of the funding to complete the first operating segment between North Bakersfield and San Jose. They're going to say, by the way, this entire project is $64 billion. Where's the money? So how do you pay for that first segment between North Bakersfield and San Jose, and how do you pay for the entire project, at least this first major part of it, that is LA to San Francisco?
Well, we're connecting the Silicon Valley to the Central Valley, and that's costing us about $20.8 billion, and that's a mix of federal, state dollars. The state dollars are our Prop 1A bonds that the voters passed in 2008, and the cap and trade revenue coming in from the annual program. That has fluctuated over the few auctions, but it's starting to stabilize.
Because they just renewed it to 2030, so that was a big deal.
They did, and that I think helped stabilize the market.
And the last auction, I think, went very well.
It did.
As a result.
It did. We estimate about $500 million a year from that program to help us get to that $20 billion cost for Valley to Valley.
There was a recent story about a $50 million contract amendment for some unanticipated construction costs. What can you tell us about that?
So in big infrastructure projects like this, you're going to see cost pressures, but where you see cost pressures, you also see cost savings. So right now in the Central Valley, we have 119 miles under construction, and what you're referring to is some cost increases to some of the work we were doing there to acquire property and to work on third party. But we don't see it as an overall budget concern at this time.
Because it's already in the budget, right?
Correct.
I mean, you anticipate in these large projects, multi-billion-dollar projects, there might be some cost overruns, and there's going to be some cost savings, I assume, right? So
absolutely.
This is factored in.
And this is us being transparent with the public and open about where we're spending the money and how we're spending it.
Okay, so even if you secure sufficient funding, the skeptics are still going to say, listen, you're talking about having this completed between North Bakersfield and San Jose by 2024, but you got ongoing lawsuits, you've got securing land, you've got environmental requirements. What's your response?
Well, we've had a lot of successes to get the Valley up and running by 2025. Just this month, we'll have expended $2.55 billion to get 119 miles under construction. We've put over 1,400 building craftsmen and women to work. We have hundreds of small businesses. So yes, there's always going to be challenges with major infrastructure projects, but the amount of progress we've made in the short 5 years since our funding was appropriated is significant for a project of this size.
There were some recent decisions by the courts about whether CEQA would apply. And they said, yeah, you're probably going to have to apply, follow that, and CEQA has a tendency to take some time to get through that process. So what are any concerns there?
No, because we've always planned to do CEQA and NEPA, the federal and state environmental clearance, and we're going to continue to do that.
Okay, so every other year, I guess, even year, you guys have to do a updated business plan. So I'm just wondering, so the next updated business plan is 2018. Do you anticipate any major changes?
So right now we're working to put that together. We issue the draft in February for a 60-day public comment period. There's usually legislative hearings, there's input from the board, and then we'll adopt it in April and submit it to the legislature in May. It's hard to say at this point. We still are focused on getting Valley to Valley up, because once you initiate passenger service, you bring in that private sector investment to help build out the rest of the system. And by law, we have got to build the San Francisco to LA base to connect and transform the state.
Yeah, so speaking of transforming the state, I want to ask you about some of the unique opportunities with high-speed rail. There's a major housing crisis on the coast, particularly in Silicon Valley and the Bay Area. High-speed rail would connect that to the Central Valley. Could the Central Valley someday be home to Silicon Valley workers?
We hope so. Right now it takes about 3 hours to drive from Fresno to the Bay Area. On high-speed rail it will take less than 60 minutes. Think about the opportunity that provides the Silicon Valley if they want to open a back-end operation or a new facility in Fresno. They've got educated students coming out of some of the great UC systems and state schools in the valley, and they have cheaper housing and affordable housing. It also helps an area that's been hurt by the recession continue to recover. And that's one of the big opportunities that connecting the valley to the Silicon Valley and the Central Valley make.
It's interesting, there was a UCLA study, not on this particular product, but on China, and the effects that its high-speed rail had on these, what they call secondary cities. And the researcher apparently said, Bakersfield is like those secondary cities, and he made a comment that there are some serious real estate implications for Bakersfield if this happens.
It's important. Not only will Bakersfield be connected to Fresno and the Silicon Valley, but it will also connect the gap between the Tehachapi Mountains to connect Bakersfield down to Southern California, which also opens a big market there for opportunities for housing, for opportunities for businesses and people.
Yeah, that would be incredible. Perhaps we're going to see a historic population shift.
We could. I think the Valley would be proud of that.
That would be great. Well, anyway, thank you very much for talking with us. Up next, the politics of transportation. That conversation in a moment. This is the Maddie Report. Welcome back. This is Mark Kepler with the Maddie Institute. We're talking about the politics of transportation now with two guests, Dan Walters with Cal Matters and John Myers from the LA Times. So, Dan, let me start with you first. We were just talking about high-speed rail in the earlier segment. We have former LA Mayor Antonio Villaraigosa kind of positioning himself as pro-high-speed rail, as opposed to former San Francisco Mayor, current Lieutenant Governor Gavin Newsom, seems to be lukewarm at best toward high-speed rail. Is that going to hurt or help Villaraigosa?
I don't think it's going to help him, except maybe in Fresno, to tell you the truth.
Which might help.
Maybe that'll be critical. I don't know.
He is focusing on the valley.
The bullet train, as I like to call it, is not popular in California. I mean, the bloom is off that rose, basically, and it's now, I think, seen increasingly as something of a joke, to tell you the truth. And once they build that train to nowhere down the valley, that ends at Orchard near Fowler or something like that.
It's a Shafters, actually.
Shafter,
yeah, north of
Orchard
Bakersfield.
Near Shafter. Mm-hmm. That's about it until they come up with some more money. And there's all sorts of things kicking around, like, taking the cap and trade money and using that to serve as a loan of some kind and so forth to build the next segment, which is to Chowchilla to San Jose. Right. But nobody's kind of figured it out yet, and in the absence of money, it's probably not going to happen.
What do you think?
I don't know that there's a downside for Villaraigosa here, right? Let's look at the person that the next governor wants to replace. Jerry Brown has been, I want to say passionate, but then I don't want to say passionate because he hasn't talked about high-speed rail, I don't think, quite as much as maybe he needed to, I think, in terms of a sales pitch to maybe change the conversation. But he has supported it all the way through, downsized the project some a little bit when he came on board. So you're trying to replace that person. And it seems like to me for Villaraigosa, if you don't poke the bear, so to speak, right here by saying I hate it or I want to kill it, like that's a problem for the other candidates. If the governor comes out and has a fight with them in 2018, this project's got a long way to go. And Dan's exactly right. Money is its biggest problem, federal money or private money. The next governor, no matter what they say on the campaign trail, has got something else to do once the election's
It's interesting, the
over.
polling, PPIC polling came out recently. It said that people support Governor Brown, but they want to see a change in the policies going forward. So I don't know if that helps or hurts Villaraigosa who follows him. Let me ask you this, John, about the public consistently says, hey, we want good roads. They also consistently say we don't want to pay for them. Will the fact that they start seeing improvements on California highways kind of mute the anger toward this gas tax and vehicle fee?
I don't know. I think a lot of things are variables at this point, as we're sitting here talking about this. First of all, the gas tax goes into effect on November 1st. It's going to take a while to see that. We don't know what the price of gas will be on November 1st, so we don't know what the relative effect on someone's pocketbook is going to be. Then we've got to see money go out the door. And the other part that I don't think gets talked a lot about, Mark, is that when, and I talk to my friends about the roads, and the concerns are either there are too many potholes or there aren't enough lanes. Those are vastly different topics that have to be addressed.
And they're spending money on maintenance. They're not spending on capacity.
Yeah, and that's the whole thing. That's part of the conversation too. So I think does the voter see their bang for the buck? I don't know, but I do think that the price of gas once this starts and what it has on that price, that's going to be where the narrative goes somewhat, I think.
And I would say that it also depends on what the price of gas is otherwise. If you notice, we've seen up and down a lot in gas prices in California, most recently because of the hurricane that hit Houston. They've jacked up and then they've come back down, and they've gone up and down maybe a dime, 15 cents a gallon in the recent weeks. So if you happen to impose that tax at a time of a downtime, it's not going to have the same effect as you would if it was already out in the uptime.
And they are kind of doing that because the summer formula gas formula is more expensive, and that stops after November 1st.
Yeah.
And so the price, maybe you won't see it as much.
But I think
you'll see it next year.
The key to this thing is, as we said earlier, this is about maintenance and fixing potholes, so to speak, not about expanding capacity. And the biggest complaint about the highways in California is congestion. We have the most congested roadways in the nation. This is not going to do anything about that. And so, but when they were trying to sell it before the fact, they talked about congestion a lot. So they kind of raised the expectation, the politicians, that this was going to do something about it, all the time knowing that it was never going to be spent on that, because they knew that that was what the public was most concerned about, is congestion. And so I think there could be a big disappointment here when we see congestion get continuously worse. Yeah. It's probably going to backfire a little bit.
So they'll be sitting in traffic but on very smooth roads.
Well, and the politics of this also gets complicated by the fact that you've got the gas tax, or the fuel taxes, I should say, because there's diesel as well, and you've got this new fee on vehicles. All of this kicks in at different times. What will be going on? What discussion will be out and among the voters and the people when it happens? Let's not forget 2003, when people started getting those vehicle license fee increases. They did not help Gray Davis's chances in that recall election.
Not at all. Well, I want to thank our guests, John Myers with the LA Times, Dan Walters with Cal Matters, also California Secretary of Transportation Brian Kelly, and Lisa Morale from the California High-Speed Rail Authority. This is Mark Kepler for the Maddy Report. Thanks for joining us.
The views expressed in the Maddy Report are those of the individuals participating in the program and do not necessarily reflect those of the California Channel or the Maddy Institute. If you'd like to share your thoughts about the points and opinions expressed on the Maddy Report, visit our website at maddyinstitute.org.